The neutral lands stretched like a scar across the wilderness, a buffer zone where no pack claimed dominion, and only the desperate or the dangerous dared to tread. Kira moved through the twisted pines with the fluid grace of a predator, her footfalls silent despite the carpet of dead needles beneath her boots. She had learned long ago how to move like a ghost, how to exist in the spaces between territories without drawing the attention of those who would question a wolf without a pack. Her leather armor was worn but meticulously maintained, the dark material marked with repairs that told the story of countless battles survived. Across her back, 2 crossed blades caught the filtered sunlight, their hilts wrapped in fraying cord that her hands knew better than any lover's touch. She was heading toward the border of Steelclaw territory, drawn by rumors that had rippled through the taverns and trading posts of the neutral zones. War was coming, they said, and Commander Draken, Steelclaw, was hiring mercenaries to bolster his forces against an invasion from the eastern packs. Kira had no love for the Steelclaw name, no particular loyalty to their cause. But gold was gold, and battle was the only language she spoke fluently anymore. The memories of her own pack, the Moonwhisper family that had been slaughtered 15 years ago when she was barely old enough to shift, remained locked in a part of her mind she refused to visit. She had survived that night by hiding like a coward while her parents and siblings were cut down by Alpha Varric's warriors, their lands seized under false claims of territory disputes. The other packs had turned away, unwilling to challenge Varric's growing power, and Kira had been left with nothing but her life and the shame of her survival. She reached the checkpoint at the Steelclaw border as the sun climbed toward noon, where 2 guards in the distinctive steel-gray uniforms of the pack's military stood watch. They looked her over. With the casual contempt that warriors in established packs reserved for the packless, their noses wrinkling slightly as they caught her scent, or rather, the absence of the pack scent that would mark her as belonging. One of them, a scarred beta with a broken nose that had healed crooked, spat to the side before speaking. "You here for the commander's call," he said, his tone making it clear he already doubted her worth. Kira simply nodded, her silver eyes meeting his without flinching. Without showing the exhaustion that came from years of these small humiliations. The guard laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor, and gestured toward the encampment visible beyond the tree line. "Good luck, Packless. You will need it. Commander Steelclaw does not suffer fools, and he definitely does not suffer wolves, who cannot even maintain the most basic bond of our kind." She walked past them without responding, her jaw tight, but her expression carefully neutral. Let them have their mockery. Words had stopped wounding her around the same time she had claimed her first real kill. A rogue alpha who had thought a young female wolf without a pack would be easy prey. She had left his body for the crows and taken his weapons, the very blades she still carried. The Steelclaw encampment sprawled across a valley that had been cleared for training grounds, hundreds of warriors moving in coordinated drills that spoke of military discipline, honed over generations. The pack's banner flew from every watchtower, a steel claw clutching a full moon against a field of gray, the symbol of a family that traced its lineage back to the first wars of the Wolf Kingdoms. Kira made her way toward the central command tent, a massive structure of reinforced canvas and wooden supports, where a crowd of other mercenaries had gathered. She recognized some of them by reputation, lone wolves and small pack outcasts, who sold their skills to the highest bidder, but she kept her distance. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, and attachments only led to complications when the killing started. A horn sounded, 3 sharp blasts that cut through the noise of the camp, and the crowd fell silent as a figure emerged from the command tent. Alpha Commander Draken Steelclaw stood well over 6 feet tall, his frame packed with the kind of muscle that came from a lifetime of combat training and actual warfare. His hair was dark as a moonless night, pulled back in a warrior's knot that revealed the sharp angles of his face and the cold, amber eyes that surveyed the assembled mercenaries like a general inspecting questionable troops. He wore the formal armor of his rank, steel plates over black leather, and the commander's torque around his neck, marked with the symbols of his victories. Everything about him radiated dominance. the absolute confidence of an alpha who had never questioned his place in the world, or his right to command those beneath him. If you are interested in stories about warriors who defy expectations and alphas who learn hard lessons about respect, make sure to like this video and let me know in the comments what you think of Kira so far. Your support helps me bring these stories to life, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now, let's see what happens when Draken finally addresses the mercenaries he's so clearly skeptical about. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the assembled crowd with the natural projection of someone born to lead, though the words themselves held little warmth. You have answered the call because you want gold, and I have gold because I need bodies on the wall when the Eastern Alliance comes. Let's not pretend this is about honor or loyalty. You fight, you survive, you get paid. You run, you die by my hand before the enemy gets the chance. Simple terms for simple arrangements. His gaze swept across the mercenaries, dismissive and calculating, until it landed on Kira and stopped. She saw the moment. His eyes registered her presence. The way his expression shifted from general contempt to something more specific and more personal. He stepped forward, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew they would part before him, until he stood directly in front of her. The height difference forced her to look up slightly, but she held his gaze without flinching, her chin raised in a defiance she had learned never to fully suppress. "What is your name?" Draken demanded, his voice carrying that edge of command that expected immediate obedience. "Kira," she answered simply, offering nothing more because he had earned nothing more. Just Kira. No family name, no pack affiliation. Nothing to mark her as anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. Dracon's lips curved in something that might have been a smile if smiles could carry such cold amusement. "Just Kira," he repeated, his voice rising so that the entire assembly could hear his next words clearly. A warrior with no pack, no family, no bond to tie her to anything beyond her own survival. "Tell me, just Kira, why should I trust someone to defend my banner when she could not even maintain a place in her own pack?" The other mercenaries shifted uncomfortably, but none came to her defense. This was the hierarchy of their world, and challenging an alpha commander in his own territory was a quick way to end up dead or worse. Kira felt the familiar burn of rage in her chest, the wolf inside her snarling at the moor. Disrespect. But she had spent 15 years learning to channel that anger into something cold and controlled. "Because wolves with packs fight for their families," she said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "I fight because it is all I have left. That makes me more dangerous than any of your comfortable warriors who have never known what it means to have nothing to lose." For a moment, something flickered in Dracon's eyes, perhaps surprise that she had dared to respond. Perhaps recognition of a truth he did not want to acknowledge, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same dismissive arrogance. "We shall see," he said, turning away from her to address the crowd again. "Training begins at dawn. Show me you are worth the gold I am offering, or find yourselves back in whatever holes you crawled from." His lieutenants began organizing the mercenaries into squads, assigning them to different sections of the defensive perimeter, based on their stated skills and experience. Kira found herself placed on the western wall, the section considered least likely to see heavy action based on the intelligence reports about the Eastern Alliance's probable approach vectors. It was a deliberate slight, she realized, Draken's way of keeping the packless warrior away from anything important, while still technically fulfilling his agreement to hire her. She accepted the assignment without complaint, took the steel-gray armband that marked her as a temporary auxiliary of the Steelclaw forces, and made her way to the barracks that had been set aside for the mercenaries. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation, the entire valley transforming into a fortress as Drakon drove his forces through relentless training exercises and defensive construction. Kira kept to herself, performing her assigned duties with quiet efficiency while enduring the casual contempt of the pack warriors who seemed to take their commander's lead in viewing her as something less than a real wolf. She heard the whispers, of course, the speculation about what she had done to lose her pack, or whether she had ever had one at all. Some thought she might be feral, a wolf who had never learned to shift properly or bond with others. Others suggested darker possibilities, that she had been exiled for crimes too terrible to speak of, that the absence of pack scent meant she carried some kind of curse or corruption. Kira let them talk, let them build their stories, because the truth was somehow worse than any fiction they could imagine. The truth was that she had been powerless to save her family, that she carried the bloodline of the ancient Moon Whisper Guardians who were supposed to protect the balance between all packs, and she had failed at the most basic level. The Eastern Alliance arrived on a moonless night. 3,000 warriors from 4 different packs who had united under the banner of conquest and the promise of dividing Steelclaw territory among themselves. They came with siege engines and fire, with coordinated assault teams that hit multiple points along the defensive perimeter simultaneously. Kira was on the western wall when the first alarms sounded, the great warning bells that sent warriors scrambling to their positions. She had her blades in hand before her conscious mind fully registered the threat. Muscle memory and instinct taking over as the distant sounds of battle erupted from the eastern approaches. For 3 hours, the western wall remained quiet, a strange pocket of peace, while the rest of the valley descended into chaos. Kira watched the fires burning in the distance, heard the screams and clash of steel, and felt the familiar restlessness of a warrior kept from the fight. Then everything changed when a runner came sprinting along the wall, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder, and his eyes wild with panic. "They have broken through," he gasped to the captain of the Western Guard. "The eastern wall has fallen, and they are pushing toward the command center. The commander is calling all reserves to the main banner. If the standard falls, we lose everything." The captain immediately began organizing his forces to reinforce the failing eastern line. But his eyes passed over Kira as if she was invisible, as if the packless mercenary was not worth including in the desperate defense of the heart of Steelclaw territory. She felt the old anger flare, the sense of being dismissed and underestimated, that had followed her since the night her pack died, but she channeled it into decision. The captain could ignore her all he wanted. She knew where she was needed. Kira left her assigned position without permission, running through the chaos of the encampment toward the sounds of heaviest fighting. The eastern approaches had been transformed into a hellscape, bodies littering the ground, and the earth torn up by the passage of the siege engines that had breached the walls. She could see the command center in the distance, the great banner of Steelclaw still flying, but surrounded by a shrinking circle of defenders who were being overwhelmed by the sheer numbers pressing against them. Enemy warriors were everywhere, their combined pack sense creating a choking miasma that spoke of the Alliance's unified purpose. Have you ever had to fight for something not because it was yours, but because letting it fall would be wrong? Drop a comment about the hardest stand you have ever taken. And don't forget that liking and sharing this video helps other people discover these stories. Let's get back to Kira's desperate charge toward the falling banner. She hit the enemy line like an avalanche, her blades singing as they cut through the first rank of warriors who were too focused on the defenders ahead to notice the lone wolf attacking from their flank. Kira had learned to fight without the enhanced coordination that came from pack bonds, which meant she had developed a style that was purely individual, unpredictable, and brutally efficient. She did not fight like someone who expected backup or reinforcement. She fought like someone who had accepted death long ago and simply refused to go down easily. Her first blade took an enemy beta in the throat, the second opening the belly of an alpha who turned too slowly to block. She moved through their formations like smoke, never staying in one place long enough for them to coordinate against her, using their numbers against them, by forcing them into each other's way. Blood soaked her armor, and she could not tell how much of it was hers, her enhanced healing already working on the wounds she was collecting, burning through her energy reserves to keep her moving. The banner was closer now. She could see Drekon in the center of the defensive circle, his armor dented and his face covered in blood, still fighting with the relentless determination of an alpha who would rather die than surrender his family's honor. But the circle was collapsing, the defenders falling one by one under the overwhelming press of enemies, and Kira could see what Drekon apparently could not or would not accept, that the banner itself had become a target. 3 enemy alphas were pushing specifically toward the Great Standard, understanding that capturing or destroying it would break the spirit of the Steelclaw forces more effectively than killing any number of warriors. In wolf culture, the banner was not just a symbol, but a physical representation of the pack's soul, woven with the fur of ancestors and marked with the blood of every alpha who had led them. To lose it was to lose everything. To admit that the pack itself had been conquered at the most fundamental level. Kira saw the enemy alphas break through the last line of defenders, saw them reaching for the banner's pole, and she made a decision that defied all logic and self-preservation. She threw herself forward in a desperate lunge, her body crashing into the eye, nearest alpha with enough force to send them both tumbling. Her blade found his heart before they hit the ground, but the other two were already on her, their claws tearing into her back and shoulders as she rolled and came up in a crouch. Pain exploded through her nervous system, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the banner pole that was starting to tilt as its base was damaged in the fighting. If it fell, if that standard touched the ground, the psychological blow would be devastating. She abandoned defense entirely, taking wounds that would have killed a lesser wolf, her own claws extending as she ripped into the second alpha's leg and brought him down. The third caught her across the ribs with a blow that cracked bone, but Kira's blade was already moving, opening his throat in a spray of arterial blood. Then she was at the banner pole, her hands closing around the ancient wood even as her legs threatened to give out beneath her. She could feel the weight of it, heavier than it should be because it carried the history of generations, and she pulled it upright through sheer force of will. Her blood ran down the pole, mixing with the blood of countless steel-claw warriors who had defended it before her. And she planted her feet and held it high, even as the world started to gray at the edges. Around her she heard the roar of steel-claw warriors seeing their banner still flying, seeing it held by a lone figure who refused to let it fall. The tide of battle shifted in. That moment, the defenders finding renewed strength while the attackers faltered, their own momentum broken by the failure to claim the symbol they had fought so hard to reach. Kira held the banner until Draken himself reached her position, his eyes wide with something that might have been shock or respect or both. He took the pole from her shaking hands, as her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed to her knees, her body finally acknowledging the extent of her injuries. The battle raged for another hour before the Eastern Alliance finally broke and retreated, their losses too heavy to sustain the assault. Kira remembered very little of that hour, drifting in and out of consciousness, while pack healers worked on her wounds, and the sounds of fighting gradually faded into the eerie quiet of aftermath. When she finally woke fully, she found herself in a private tent that smelled of healing herbs and clean linens, a far cry from the mercenary barracks where she had been housed before. The battle. Her body ached with the deep bone weariness that came after major healing, her enhanced metabolism having burned through enormous amounts of energy to repair the damage she had taken. A figure stirred in the shadows at the edge of the tent, and Draken stepped into the light of the oil lamps, his expression unreadable. He looked different somehow. The arrogance that had defined him before, tempered by something she could not quite identify. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat, his amber eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze out of stubborn pride. "You saved the banner," he said quietly, stating the obvious as if he still could not quite believe it. "You had no reason to leave your post, no obligation to risk your life for a pack that is not yours, for a commander who mocked you in front of everyone. Why did you do it?" Kira considered the question, turning it over in her mind while she decided how much truth to offer this alpha who had treated her with such contempt. "Because it was the right thing to do," she finally said, her voice rough from screaming during the battle, though she had no memory of making those sounds. "Because I know what it means to watch everything fall and be powerless to stop it. Because maybe if I can save someone else's banner, someone else's family, it makes up in some small way for the fact that I could not save my own." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than she had intended, revealing more than she usually allowed anyone to see. Draken's expression shifted, something like pain flickering across his features. "I owe you an apology," he said, and she could hear how much it cost him to admit it. "I judged you without knowing your story, dismissed you because you did not fit into my understanding of what a warrior should be. That was wrong, and it nearly cost my pack everything." Kira felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had been carrying. For so long she had forgotten it was there. "Your apology is noted," she said carefully, not quite ready to forgive but acknowledging the gesture. "But you should know that I am not looking for acceptance or a place in your pack. I did what I did because it needed doing, not because I want to belong here. If you are loving the tension between these two and want to see where this impossible connection leads, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Hit that like button if you are invested in Kira's journey, and comment below about whether you think Draken deserves a second chance. Trust me, what comes next is going to challenge everything both of them believe about fate and choice." Draken leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "What if I told you that you already belong here?" he said quietly. "What if I told you that from the moment you held that banner, I felt something I have never felt before? The wolf inside me recognized you, Kira. You are my mate, my destined partner according to the old bonds that even we cannot fully control or understand." The words hit her like a physical blow, her eyes widening in shock and immediate denial. "No," she said flatly, trying to sit up despite the protests from her healing body. "No, that is impossible. I would have felt it too, would have known." Draken shook his head slowly. "Sometimes the bond does not manifest clearly until a moment of truth, a moment when souls are laid bare. I felt it when I saw you holding my family's banner, bleeding and defiant, more alpha in that moment than I have been in my entire reign, and I think you felt it too, even if you are not ready to admit it." Kira wanted to deny it, wanted to reject everything he was saying, but there was a traitorous whisper in the back of her mind that recognized the truth in his words. She had felt something when their eyes met across the battlefield, something that went beyond adrenaline or the chaos of combat. But feeling a mate bond did not erase the fact that this alpha had humiliated her, had dismissed her worth in front of his entire pack. It did not change the years she had spent alone, learning to trust no one and need nothing beyond her own skills. "I do not care what you felt," she said, her voice hard despite the exhaustion dragging at her. "You do not get to mock me one day and claim me as your mate the next. Bonds can be rejected, and even if they could not be, I would not choose an alpha who judges worth by pack affiliation, rather than character." Draken flinched as if she had struck him, but he did not argue or try to use his dominance to force the issue. Instead, he stood, moving toward the tent entrance before pausing to look back at her. "You are right," he said simply. "I do not deserve your acceptance, and I will not push for something I have not earned. But I want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it, mate bond or not. You saved my pack, and that debt can never be fully repaid. Rest, heal, and when you are ready, we will talk about what comes next." He left before she could formulate a response, the tent flap falling closed behind him and leaving her alone with thoughts that refused to settle into any coherent pattern. The days that followed were strange and uncomfortable, in ways that had nothing to do with her physical recovery. Draken kept his word about not pushing the mate bond, but his behavior toward her changed completely. He treated her with a respect that bordered on deference, asking her opinion on defensive strategies and including her in command meetings that mercenaries would never normally attend. The pack warriors who had dismissed her before now watched her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The story of the packless wolf who held the banner having spread through the ranks and taken on an almost mythical quality. Kira found herself in the bizarre position of being simultaneously honored and isolated, respected for her actions, but still fundamentally separate from the pack structure that defined everyone else's existence. She told herself she would leave as soon as she was fully healed, that there was nothing for her here beyond the gold she had earned and the uncomfortable weight of Draken's gratitude. But weeks passed and she found excuses to stay, telling herself it was because the Eastern Alliance might attack again, or because the pack's defenses still needed work, or because she wanted to make sure her payment was properly calculated. The truth, which she barely admitted even to herself, was that something about being here felt different from the endless wandering that had defined her life since the massacre. She began training with some of the younger warriors, teaching them the techniques she had developed for fighting without pack coordination. She found herself laughing at jokes shared around the evening fires, participating in conversations about everything and nothing, and she caught herself watching Draken when she thought he was not looking, studying the way he moved through his responsibilities with a dedication that went beyond mere duty. She saw him stay up late reviewing supply reports to ensure his people were fed, saw him personally visit wounded warriors to check on their recovery, saw the weight of leadership that pressed on his shoulders every moment of every day. This was not the arrogant alpha who had mocked her at their first meeting. This was someone who carried the survival of hundreds of people as his personal burden, who made hard decisions knowing that every choice could mean life or death for those who depended on him. She was sitting on the wall one evening, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson, when Draken climbed up to join her. He did not ask permission, simply settled beside her with a comfortable silence that they had developed over the weeks. They sat without speaking for a long time, watching the light fade and the first stars emerge, before he finally broke the quiet. "I have been researching the Moon Whisper line," he said, his voice careful as if he knew he was treading on dangerous ground. "The pack historians had records going back centuries. Did you know that your family were not just another pack, but guardians? Protectors who were supposed to maintain the balance between all wolf kind, who served no single alpha but answered to the greater good of all packs." Kira felt her entire body tense, her hands clenching into fists as old pain rose up to choke her. "I know what my family was supposed to be," she said tightly. "I also know that when we needed protection, when Alpha Varric came with his warriors to slaughter us for our lands, not a single pack stood with us. The Guardians died, and the balance they protected died with them. So forgive me if I do not want to discuss ancient history and noble bloodlines that meant nothing in the end." Draken turned to look at her fully, his amber eyes reflecting the last light of the sunset. "You survived," he said quietly. "That means the Guardian line did not die. It means that everything your family stood for, everything they were supposed to protect, still exists in you. Kira, you held my banner not because you owed my pack anything, but because you saw beyond pack loyalty to something larger. You fought for what was right, not for what benefited you personally. That is what Guardians do." She wanted to reject his words, wanted to tell him that she was no guardian, but simply a survivor who had made a choice in the heat of battle. But something in her chest was unfurling, a truth she had been running from for 15 years. What if he was right? What if the reason she had never been able to simply walk away from injustice, the reason she fought for causes that offered her nothing, was because the guardian blood in her veins would not let her be anything less than what her family had been? Do you want to see how Kira finally confronts the truth about who she really is? Make sure to like this video if you are invested in her journey, and subscribe to follow this story to its conclusion. Comment below about your thoughts on destiny versus choice, because what happens next is going to force both Kira and Draken to decide what they truly believe. The turning point came 3 months after the battle, when a messenger arrived from the Council of Alphas with news that sent shockwaves through the entire pack. Alpha Varric, the wolf who had murdered Kira's family and seized their lands, was demanding recognition from the Council for his expanding territory. He was claiming that the Moon Whisper lands had been legitimately conquered, that there were no surviving heirs to contest his claim, and that the Council should formally acknowledge his sovereignty over what had been Guardian territory for 1,000 years. Draken brought the news to Kira personally, finding her in the training yard where she had been working, through sword forms with an intensity that spoke of inner turmoil. His expression was grim as he approached, the official council seal clutched in his hand. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Somewhere private. She followed him to his personal quarters, a space she had never entered before, furnished simply despite his rank. He handed her the letter and watched her face as she read, saw the color drain from her cheeks, and then return as hot rage. "They are going to let him keep it," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "They are going to let him profit from murder and call it legitimate conquest. Not if you challenge his claim," Draken said carefully. "As the surviving heir of the Moon Whisper line, you have the right to contest his sovereignty before the Council. You have the right to demand trial by combat for the return of your ancestral lands. But Kira, You need to understand what that would mean. Varric is one of the most powerful alphas in the region. He has spent 15 years consolidating his power, building alliances, and he will not face you himself. He will choose a champion, probably multiple champions, and the combat will be to the death. I know, Kira said, but her voice was steady now, the initial shock giving way to cold determination. I know what it would cost, and I know the odds are against me. But I cannot let him win, cannot let my family's murder be legitimized by bureaucratic procedure and political convenience. I am going to challenge him, and I'm going to take back what he stole. Draken looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. A decision being made. Then you will not go alone, he said firmly. As your mate, whether you have fully accepted that bond or not, I have the right to stand as your second. And as an alpha commander, I have the resources to help you prepare. Varric took your family from you, but he will not take your future. Not while I have breath in my body. Kira felt something crack in. The walls she had built around her heart, felt the mate bond that she had been fighting suddenly flare to life with an intensity that stole her breath. She looked at this alpha who had started as her tormentor and somehow become her defender, and she made a choice that terrified her more than any battle. If we do this, she said quietly, if you stand with me against Varric, then you need to understand that I am not just fighting for land or revenge. I am fighting to reclaim what my family represented. The idea that some things are worth protecting even when it costs everything. Can you accept that? Can you accept a mate who might choose duty over safety? Who might put the greater good above our personal happiness? Drakon stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her face, with a gentleness that contradicted his warrior's strength. Kira, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I fell in love with you when I saw you holding my banner against impossible odds, choosing honor over survival. I do not want a mate who plays it safe or puts me above everything else. I want a partner who challenges me to be better, who reminds me that leadership means service, not dominance. If you will have me, if you can forgive the fool I was when we met, then I will stand with you against anything. The kiss that followed was inevitable, a collision of souls that had been circling each other for months. Kira felt the mate bond snap fully into place, a connection that went deeper than thought or choice, a recognition that this alpha was hers and she was his in ways that transcended pack politics or personal history. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his and allowed herself to smile. We are going to take down a tyrant and reclaim Guardian lands, she said, her voice mixing determination with wonder. This is possibly the worst time to start a relationship. Drakon laughed, the sound genuine and warm. Then it is a good thing, wolves. Mate for life, because you are stuck with me through whatever comes. Now, let's start planning how we are going to make Varric regret he ever touched your family. The next months were a blur of preparation and political maneuvering. Draken used his influence with the council to ensure that Kira's challenge was formally recognized, while Kira herself trained with an intensity that pushed even her enhanced abilities to their limits. The mate bond between them deepened as they worked side by side, Kira learning to trust in ways she had thought impossible, while Drakon discovered that having a partner who treated him as an equal rather than a superior made him a better leader. The pack itself underwent a transformation as word spread about their alpha commander's mate and her guardian heritage. Warriors who had once dismissed Kira now sought her guidance, and the idea that the Steel Claw pack had allied itself with the last of the ancient guardians brought a sense of purpose that went beyond mere territorial defense. The challenge was set for the spring equinox, a traditional time for resolving disputes under the old laws. The council arranged for the combat to take place in the neutral grounds, the same lands where Kira had wandered alone for so many years. Varric arrived with an entourage of 50 warriors, his power on full display, and Kira felt her wolf surge with barely controlled rage at the sight of the alpha who had destroyed her childhood. He looked older than she, remembered, streaks of gray in his dark hair, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had allowed him to order the execution of an entire family for profit. The combat itself was brutal and unforgiving. Varric sending 3 champions against Kira in succession, under the rules that allowed the challenged party to divide the contest. She defeated the first through speed and technique, the second through sheer determination when her injuries should have stopped her, and the third through something that felt like the awakening of power she had not known she possessed. Her eyes had flashed with a light that was not quite wolf and not quite human when she made the killing blow, and she felt something ancient stirring in her blood. The guardian abilities that had lain dormant since her family's death. Varric himself stepped onto the field for the final round, his pride not allowing him to concede defeat, even as his champions fell. The fight between them was more than personal. Combat. It was the settling of a blood debt 15 years in the making, and Kira fought with the spirits of her murdered family driving every strike. In the end, she stood over Varric's broken body with her blade at his throat, and the council formally recognized her claim to the Moonwhisper lands and her right to exact justice for her family's murder. She could have killed him then, could have taken the vengeance she had dreamed about for half her life, but she looked into his eyes and saw only a pathetic old wolf who had built his power on the graves of innocents. "Death is too easy for you," she said clearly, her voice carrying to all the witnesses. "You will live, but you will live as I did, packless and powerless, stripped of everything you stole. Let the other packs see what happens to those who murder guardians and think they can profit from it." The council enforced her judgment, and Varric was cast out to wander the neutral lands with nothing but his life, the same mercy he had shown a young Kira hiding in the ruins of her home. Are you ready for the epilogue? Drop a like if this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, and make sure you are subscribed because I have so many more tales like this coming. Comment below about what you think Kira should do next, because the future is wide open for a guardian who has reclaimed her power. 5 years later, the Moonwhisper lands had been restored to something approaching their former glory, though Kira had made it clear that they would never again be isolated territory serving only one family. The rebuilt compound served as a training ground for warriors from all packs who wanted to learn the guardian ways, the philosophy that some things transcended pack loyalty and required protection from all wolf kind. Kira and Drakon had merged their territories and their lives, creating something new that honored both the Steelclaw military traditions and the Moonwhisper Guardian legacy. Their twin daughters, barely 3 years old, were already showing signs of the power that came from combining 2 ancient bloodlines, their eyes flashing with that same otherworldly light when they played too roughly or got excited. Kira stood on the wall of the restored compound, watching the sun set over lands she had thought she would never see again, and felt Dracon's arms wrap around her from behind. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly, his chin resting on her shoulder in the comfortable intimacy of mates who had weathered storms together. She leaned back into his warmth, considering the question seriously. "I am content," she said finally. "I am building something that matters, raising daughters who will never know what it means to be packless or powerless. I have a mate who sees me as an equal, and a pack that has learned that strength comes in many forms. Is it perfect? No. Do I still have nightmares about that night 15 years ago? Sometimes. But I am no longer running, no longer alone. And that is more than I ever thought I would have." Drakon turned her in his arms so he could see her face, his amber eyes warm with love and pride. "You saved my banner," he said, echoing the words that had started everything between them. "But more than that, you saved me from becoming the kind of alpha who values pride over justice, tradition over truth. You made me better, Kira, and you gave our pack a purpose beyond mere survival. That is worth more than any territory or title." She kissed him then, slow and deep, before pulling back with a slight smile. "I seem to remember you mocking me pretty thoroughly when we first met," she teased. "Something about packless wolves not being worth the space they took up on the battlefield." He groaned, dropping his forehead to hers in exaggerated shame. "Are you ever going to let me live that down?" Kira pretended to consider it. "Maybe in another 15 years, if you are very good and continue to grovel appropriately." Their laughter echoed across the compound, mixing with the sounds of warriors training and children playing. The sounds of a community that had learned that strength came not from rigid hierarchy, but from respecting every wolf's worth regardless of their history. As darkness fell, and the first stars emerged, Kira felt a peace she had not known since childhood, the sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The packless warrior had found her pack, the lone wolf had found her mate, and the last guardian had reclaimed her purpose. And somewhere in the neutral lands, a broken alpha wandered alone, learning too late the lesson that Kira had tried to teach him, that true power came not from what you could take from others, but from what you were willing to protect even at cost to yourself. The banner still flew over Steelclaw territory, but now it flew alongside the silver moon symbol of the Moon Whisper Guardians, two families united in purpose and bound by a love that had been forged in battle and tempered by justice. And in the years to come, when other packs faced darkness and needed someone to stand between them and destruction, they would remember the story of the warrior with no pack who had saved a falling banner and changed the world. If this story moved you, if you felt Kira's journey from isolation to belonging, then please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more supernatural romance that goes deep into character, redemption, and the power of fighting for what is right. Leave a comment about which moment hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who loves stories about warriors who refuse to give up. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story where we explore more impossible love and the courage it takes to change your destiny.